Hey crewmen, welcome to this Generation Trek video on the Generation Films channel. And today we are going to look at 10 little known Starfleet ships, the unsung heroes of the Star Trek franchise. And don't worry, we're not going to show you anything from Star Trek Discovery here. We're going to be sticking to the Rick Berman era, and I have got one from the J.J. Abrams movies just because it fits into the timeline quite well. And yes, we are going in chronological order, or at least trying to. So let's go. Number 1, Freedom Class. What a great name for a class of ship. Makes me want to grab my shotgun, a can of light beer, and head out onto the open road in my monster truck. Anyway, when we say Freedom Class, we are specifically talking about the USS Franklin from Star Trek Beyond. A ship that was launched in the 2140s and was the first human ship capable of Warp 4. This made it an earlier design than the Warp 5 ship Enterprise NX-01 from Star Trek Enterprise that launched in 2151. In Star Trek Beyond, the crew used the crashed USS Franklin to escape a hostile planet. But because the ship was built in space and never intended to land on a planet, the only way is to fall off a cliff and reach terminal velocity, at which point stabilizers can be activated for liftoff. I think writer Simon Pegg just wanted to rip off this scene from James Bond's GoldenEye, where the plane falls off a cliff-top runway and plunges down a chasm, eventually reaching a high enough speed that the wings can initiate lift and pull the nose up. He even uses the exact same shot to end the sequence. But I don't think the logic would work quite the same way with a starship that doesn't have aerodynamic wings to generate lift as it reaches terminal velocity, so they came up with this excuse that the stabilizers could only be activated at terminal velocity, etc. I think it's highly likely that this shot was inspired, shall we say, by GoldenEye, a film which came out in 1995 when Simon Pegg would have been 25, so it's definitely a film of his time, and probably the kids watching Star Trek Beyond were Generation Zers who'd never seen the movie and think James Bond is a woman. Anyway, it was a cool sequence from a movie that was so good it made my wife go into labor. Like, literally, that happened in the theater while we were watching the movie, and a few hours later, this. So thank you, Simon Pegg. On to the next one. Number 2, Olympic Class. I'm including this one for a bit of a laugh. The Olympic Class is a medical frigate and, in my opinion, one of the lamest looking Starfleet ships. It has the usual 2-hull layout with warp nacelles and pylons, but instead of a saucer section, it has a sphere section. I wonder if it can separate. Come to think of it, I think we see a Olympic Class sphere section in the Battle of Geonosis in Star Wars.
Attack those Federation starships, quickly!
Even George Lucas is hating on the Olympic Class. And what if the sphere section needed to crash land on a planet like in Star Trek Generations? Would we have a sort of bowling ball situation going on? Anyway, the Olympic Class was fitted with very limited weapon systems. Its deflector was this tiny strip, and the warp drive was knocked offline at the first sign of trouble.
Warp speed, get us out of here. Warp power's offline, sir.
But it was equipped with this bonsai tree, so that more than makes up for it. We see the Olympic Class in the last episode of The Next Generation, All Good Things, as a ship in a future timeline where Beverly Crusher is now
Captain Beverly Picard.
Picard, you old dog. And despite the ship's failings, it is apparently capable of Warp 13, when the warp system is online, at least.
Geordi, we need more warp power now.
I'm trying, Captain. They're too much for us. I can't keep the phase inducers online.
And I'll leave you with this satisfying shot of an Olympic Class suffering a warp core breach. Number 3, Akira Class. And this is where we finally get into a ship that has a bit of punch to it. Designed by the Advanced Starship Design Bureau, the Akira Class was launched in the 2370s, and it was one of the few ships that the Federation has designed specifically for fighting wars. Rather than being a luxury multi-role cruise liner type affair with yoga studios, karate classes, and luxury bars that let you gaze out into space through panoramic windows. The Akira Class had 26 decks and was classed as a heavy cruiser. It could cruise at warp 9.8 for 12 hours, and it apparently had 15 torpedo launchers that could launch both photon and quantum torpedoes, although we never see it emitting this much firepower on screen. But the biggest feature of the Akira Class was that it was a carrier. It had this large shuttle bay at the front of the saucer section, which took up about a third of the saucer and held a complement of 40 attack fighters. So basically, it could do this. Except with Star Trek ships. Probably McCall class attack fighters designed by John Eves for the Enterprise E. Anyway, the Akira class was badass, but you know what else was badass? This bonsai tree on the Olympic class. Nah, just kidding. But another pretty badass ship is number 4, Norway class. The Norway class was another one of those ships that Starfleet and their Advanced Starship Design Bureau developed after their devastating defeat at the Battle of Wolf 359. The ship had a very thin profile from the side, kind of like a B-2 stealth bomber. This made it hard for enemies to hit unless they maneuvered in line with the top or bottom of the ship. 4 Norway-class ships saw action at the Battle of Sector 001 against the Borg, and Norway-class vessels served in the Dominion War, where they would often serve as an evacuation craft. Since they had an evacuation capacity of 500 people, they could evacuate the crew of an entire vessel that had been damaged and escape the battlefield because their sensor profile was so thin. Number 5, Sabre class. This was another ship designed to fight the Borg, but Sabre class ships were pretty small with just 6 decks and a crew complement of only 40. There were Sabre class ships in the Battle of Sector 001. Look, here's one launching a torpedo against a Borg cube. The Sabre class was a light cruiser, sometimes referred to as an escort cruiser. And being small ships, they were easy for Starfleet to build a lot of. They would often work in groups or with another type of ship that is the next one on our list. Number 6, Steamrunner Class. This was a larger vessel than the Sabre class with 18 decks and a crew of 200. The Steamrunner Class was designed to patrol Federation borders and deal with incursions, which is basically what it was doing at the Battle of Sector 001. The ship had warp nacelles mounted on the sides of the saucer section similar to the Sabre class, but it had the addition of an engineering hull which hung down below the main space frame of the ship and housed the navigational deflector. In the Star Trek Online video game, we also get a subclass of the Steamrunner class called the Zephyr class, which was a heavy escort and served in the 25th century. Number 7, Intrepid class variant or Jaeger class. The Intrepid class variant was a product of the Dominion War, where Starfleet scrambled to build new ships by using salvaged parts or entire hulls of old or damaged vessels and sticking them together to create new craft, or at least that's what their excuse for it was. Actually, it was just a case of kit bashing, i.e. where producers just stick together parts of different model kits so that they can avoid having to create brand new designs. The Intrepid class variant comprises an Intrepid class hull, same as the USS Voyager's saucer section, stuck on top of a Condor class Marquis raider that had Starfleet style warp nacelles stuck to the end of its weapons pylons. The ship is thus slower than a pure Intrepid class with a maximum warp speed of warp 9.55. An Intrepid class variant, the USS Jaeger, was stationed at Deep Space Nine in the year 2373 to beef up security and took part in Operation Return to retake the station after it had been captured. In addition to the Intrepid class variant, there were several other variants that I won't give their own section to, but I'll mention some of them briefly here. They include the Intrepid/Constitution class variant and the Excelsior/Constitution class variant, among others. According to the Deep Space Nine technical manual, they were all constructed from salvaged components, but in reality, it was just a case of sticking parts from different model kits together to create new designs and save a bit of money. Number 8, Nova class. Now we're talking about ships in the USS Voyager series apart from Voyager herself, and one of those is a Nova class ship called the USS Equinox, or Equinox, however you say it. We first hear of a Nova class starship in the Next Generation technical manual as a design concept for a future Enterprise. That concept was abandoned in favor of the Sovereign class, but resurrected in Star Trek Voyager for the 2-part episode Equinox, or Equinox, where the Voyager crew meet the ship of the same name that had also been flung out into the Delta Quadrant. The Nova class was a science vessel that would replace the aging Oberth class, you know, that class of ship where you never quite knew how they could get from here to here. Maybe they use the transporters, I don't know. The Nova class had 8 decks and a crew of 78, and it was more heavily armed than the Oberth class. It contained design influences from the Next Generation technical manual, Voyager with the shape of the saucer section, USS Defiant with the sunken bridge, and Enterprise E with the shape of the warp nacelles. Its signature feature was that its shields could be recharged in 45 seconds to full power after being depleted. The only problem was that it would have to go unshielded for those 45 seconds. You could say that it was a
tough little ship.
And I would agree. Number 9, Raven Class. The whole family will love the Raven Class. There's ample worktop space for mom, ample computer power for dad, and a 500-inch view screen so the whole family can watch classic movies. Little ones will feel at home in the comfortable living quarters, and there's a state-of-the-art GPS system so you never get lost.
Turn right at the plasma belt.
Wait, what are you doing next to that Borg cube? That was right at the plasma belt, not left. So hurry down to Rick's Starship Mall, where the 2354 Raven Class is available for purchase or lease. 3-year financing available on request. Approval subject to credit check. Raven Class not recommended for exploration missions or contact with hostile species such as the Borg. This was kind of like the Winnebago of Starfleet ships, an RV-sized vessel that the whole family could enjoy. And after purchasing the ship from Rick's Starship Mall, the Hansons did just that. You know when a family might take their kid out of school for a couple of weeks to go on some road trip that was always on dad's bucket list, but the kid would really prefer not to be there? Well, that's kind of what the Hansons did, except their bucket list included getting up close and personal with the Borg. And it didn't end well. The entire family got assimilated. But years later, the daughter, Annika Hansen, who was now called 7 of 9, the tertiary adjunct of blah blah blah, was freed by the Voyager crew, and she really helped improve the show's rating. Anyway, the Raven Class is a small vessel similar in size to the Runabout. Not much is known about it since it only appeared in one episode of Voyager where it looked like this and was only seen intact in flashback scenes. But I like to include one smaller vessel, something a family would fly together, because we don't see that much in Star Trek. Anyway, now for our 10th and final little-known Federation ship. Number 10, Wells Class. The Wells Class was a type of time ship that was operated by the Federation in the 29th century. It had powerful sensors that could scan not only space but also time and detect changes in the timeline by illegal time travelers. It had a temporal transporter that could beam crewmen to any point in space and time. And the class of ship was named after H.G. Wells, who wrote the classic book, The Time Machine. The most well-known Wells class was the USS Relativity, which was encountered by Voyager on her trip back from the Delta Quadrant. The Wells class was 193 meters long and had 9 decks, which made it only a little bit bigger than the Defiant class. Designer Rick Sternbach said in an interview with Trek Yards that the sleek shape was inspired by those stealth and high Mach factor aircraft that were developed at the US's Area 51 other bases in the desert. The bridge also had an unusual asymmetric design and a new style of touch interface called T-cars. Crew members didn't even need to make contact with the panel to control the ship. For propulsion, the ship had a temporal warp core and took in all its fuel through this vent on the top of the ship, making it self-sufficient. Sternbach says the circles on the wings are also inspired by the Bazard collectors on the 24th century Star Trek vessels. The whole ship could actually travel through time itself, but they normally chose not to. Instead, they would send smaller craft or use the temporal transporters. Well, that, guys, is it for our 10 little-known Starfleet ships from the Star Trek universe. Which one is your favorite? Please leave a comment below. And why not give this video a like? It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you next time on Generation Trek.